Welcome back, everyone. Another episode of Coffee with the Commish, continuing our 30 MLB teams in 30 days in preparation for the 2023 Major League Baseball season. Sticking in the NL East this time, one of the most exciting teams that we're looking forward to talking about, betting on this upcoming season, the New York Mets. I have our guy Gio coming back, joining us, talking about my favorite team in the NL East, his probably least favorite team in the NL East. Gio, welcome back, my guy.
That's dramatic. That least favorite team in the NL East. I'm
Emotionally
more than
speaking.
happy. I'm more than happy to talk about former Yankees Billy Epler and Buck Showalter.
Always got to tie the Yankees in.
Well, hey, Gio, it's just a sloppy second thing. It's fine.
Gio, let's dive right in. We got a lot to cover with this team, similar to their primary rival in the division, the Atlanta Braves. Regular season win total at the sports book set at over under 94.5. Division winner odds roughly the same as the Braves. You get them around plus 140. National League winner, to give them a little bit better odds, plus 420 to win the pennant, plus 800 to win the World Series. This is a team that is spending at unprecedented rates. They've blown through the highest competitive tax in Major League Baseball with Steve Cohen. It's prompted conversations of, does baseball need a salary cap? Are teams at a competitive disadvantage because they have an owner that's actually willing to spend money and retain their talent? Before we dive into the individual guys on this roster, I just want to know, what do you think of Steve Cohen? What do you think of all these talks in spring training about there potentially being a salary cap, or Major League Baseball trying to install one in the next couple of years and then in the next CBA? I'd be curious your thoughts.
Yeah, it's not baseball season until a day into spring training. The head of the MLB Player Association comes out and says, the next time we're negotiating a contract, there absolutely will not be a salary cap. Like that might as well just, how Wall Street does the big dong, like we're open for trading. That might as well just be like how we open up baseball season. And it's been that way since the 90s. I love Cohen. Absolutely love it. I love it for Mets fans. They live in a large market area. They've deserved to have a guy who's coming in and willing to spend the money to make sure that franchise is competitive. They haven't been really on the scene in the last 20 years being a competitive franchise. And when you have an owner who's willing to spend money in a big market, it goes a long way. I think it's ridiculous, the idea of having a salary cap in baseball. I think the Padres, just using the Padres as an example, just debunks a salary cap idea in baseball, because clearly the 28th largest media market in baseball can afford to spend the same way as a Los Angeles team or a New York City team or a Chicago team. And I kind of feel like any owner that's just crying in their cereal about it, like Pittsburgh's owner, for example, I'm just going to refer you right over to the Padres and what they're doing. And clearly you're just too poor to run your franchise. And that's not the fault of other owners who have the money to run. The only owner who can complain in baseball is Bruce Sherman for Miami, in my opinion, because his value is under what he actually paid. So he paid like $1.2 billion. They're at $999 million evaluation according to Forbes. He can complain like, hey, we need to can we get my evaluation up? But I have no sympathy for any other owner. And it's a totally socialist idea. And I'm a free market guy. And I think all those billionaires made their money somehow. And to talk about how you need such a socialist standard of bringing in a salary cap and not just let the free market reign true in baseball. I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive for some of these billionaires.
I don't disagree at all. And just to bring up the 2023 expected payroll for these teams using Spot Track here, you can see obviously the Mets are far and away leading the pack here, spending well north of $300 million on their roster this year. The Yankees are predictably up there. But like you said, the Padres are fourth. They're spending over $200 million on their team. And if you scroll to the bottom here, the Padres are spending over $200 million on their roster this season. You have Oakland, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Tampa Bay roughly combining, the four of them, to spend $200 million on their payroll. So when you look at that, it's not a matter of our teams at a competitive disadvantage, right? I think, which is a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing, is that owners are simply unwilling to spend, right? We've seen Baltimore's current ownership group spend at prolific rates in the past, right? And they've committed to
multiple times,
and they've committed to doing that again, either this upcoming free agency season in 2023 or the year after, once the team's competitive again. So these payrolls are really just it's profit seeking, right? And I'll put the full article with my full thoughts on this. I did a piece for Roto Grinders prior to the season, but it's just ludicrous to think that money guarantees a championship in Major League Baseball. It just
as a
hasn't.
Yankee fan, I can personally attest to that.
It just
He spent so much money with nothing to show.
But the Yankees are a good point, right? This is where this misconception comes from, because there is a very high correlation with teams who spend money making the playoffs, and teams that spend money typically teams that spend more money typically beat teams in the postseason that spend less money. But the teams that spend in the top 3, top 5 in baseball don't consistently win the championship year after year after year. And like we saw with the Mets last year, they got bounced in 3 games in the wild card round. They didn't even win their division. I know they won 101 games for the first time since 1988. They won 100 games, but it is such a ridiculous argument to say that if you go and buy the best players in baseball, that you will somehow be the best organization. Because that's the other part of this is you can spend the most money of any team in the league on your major league roster. Cohen doesn't want to spend $400 million or $350 million on his roster. He wants there to be organic talent coming up through the system. But when you inherit a team that has no, or a very, very few prospects coming up that can make a tangible impact on the major league roster immediately, yeah, a guy that has as much money as Steve Cohen has every right to spend to try to put his organization in the best possible position to win a championship. Whether or not that happens, we'll see. But no one can fault him for a lack of effort, which is a huge deal when you look at all these other owners who are clearly prioritizing their profit over putting a winning club on the field each season.
So the Yankees are a good example. The people throw like a lot of shade at them, but the cores of those teams that they bought all their players were guys that are coming out of the farm system, and then they pay to keep them. So the Mets, when I look at like their top prospects coming up, it's a perfect example. Like Cohen is investing top to bottom to make sure that the entire franchise is just churning out solid prospects. And then he just has the money to keep them. That's what's important about having an owner that's willing to spend money. It's not the owner, in my opinion, who's willing to go out and buy Alex Rodriguez, go out and buy, the marquee free agent like a Shohei Ohtani. It's the owner who lets the team run itself, puts a great front office into play. And then when the front office comes to them and says, we need to keep this guy because he's going to be, we've grown this talent into the top in baseball. Therefore, we need to invest the money to keep him. The owner's like, how many zeros do you need on the check? Like, that's what you need. And that's what the Mets have in Cohen. So, like, I don't think Cohen's coming into baseball and just saying, fuck it, I'm just going to completely rewrite exactly how everyone spends money. Cohen comes into baseball with, I have an unlimited checkbook, but it doesn't mean I want to spend all of it. Like, I just want to make smart decisions. And that's a great thing for baseball. And I think there are some owners who can't put a good front office together and are unwilling to spend the money. So it's, screw you guys is my attitude if I'm Steve Cohen, where he's making all the right decisions. I have some questions about kind of like the guys he's put in charge of those decisions. I wonder how involved that he is, but that's what you want in an owner. I don't want to be known as the guy who thinks that, you need to buy players and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that. I think that you need to invest in the players that you build up.
Yep. And real quick before we dive into these players, exactly what you just said, right? I think Cohen's getting a bad rap because he just went out and replaced Jacob deGrom with Justin Verlander. He's getting a bad rap because he just brought Kodai Senga over from overseas. But when you look at some of these deals, right? Like Brandon Nimmo has been with the organization for a long time. He just locked him up for another 8 years, just under $200 million on that contract. He just extended Jeff McNeil, a fan favorite, a guy coming off of a National League batting title. You're going to have to pay Pete Alonso. I know Francisco Lindor was acquired via a trade. But again, Cohen didn't get to draft guys, right? He didn't get to put that infrastructure in place over the last decade. So yeah, if you come in and you inherit a new organization, you don't want to suck. And if you have the money to try to suck less, why would you not to go do that, right? So why would you not go get Lindor and then lock him up for the next decade? Why would you not go get Max Scherzer for the last couple of years of his career and do the Starling Marte to put yourself in a position to try to win? So I don't want to turn this into a salary cap video. We can
but it goes into that conversation of the front office. which they got Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty coming up. I mean, those are two top 100 prospects that are going to come up. Yep. And, that you get a guy like Omar Narvaez at catcher for now as the stopgap, but really it's about getting Francisco Alvarez up, right? So Eduardo Escobar is not going to play third base. It's going to be Brett Beatty. So it's, that's what I mean. Like, that's what a true franchise in a large market should be doing. They shouldn't be recklessly spending money. It should be like the Dodgers. The Dodgers have been churning out good prospects and being able to keep all those good prospects.
And then going and buying at a position of need, right? They go or they go add to the rotation and things like that. So I agree, man. I wanted to touch on it because it's been such a hot topic throughout baseball, throughout the offseason, into spring training of Cohen's ruining baseball. And the other thing we'll just note, and then I promise we'll dive in here, is there has not been any owners come out vocally opposing what Cohen has done. We've had Pittsburgh's owner came out and said he would be in support of a salary cap. We've had some other owners make some backhanded comments, but no one has gone up to Cohen at owners meetings and told him that he's ruining baseball. There's been no owners that have gone to the press and said that they can't win because of what Cohen's doing. Pittsburgh's not going to win whether you let Cohen spend $400 or $500 million or whether you limit him to 100, because Pittsburgh is going to spend 25% of that regardless. Right. So
yeah, I don't see Pittsburgh winning anytime soon. Even if I gifted them Jeff Bezos as an owner, I don't think that I would see Pittsburgh win anytime soon. So,
but Gio, let's dive in. Finally, I know we spent a little bit longer on the front office and the salary portion of the Mets than maybe we anticipated, but let's start with the first guy that it sort of sparked a lot of these conversations, going and getting Justin Verlander this offseason, coming off of an American League Cy Young win with the Houston Astros. A lot of people were pretty surprised that he left the Astros organization after what they did to resurrect his career after he left Detroit. The numbers spoke for themselves last year, but he is 40 years old. It's fair to wonder how much is left in the tank. It's fair to wonder, can he come back and continue to compete at a high level? What thoughts do you have on JV heading into the new year?
So you pay Justin Verlander $43 million a year. He's 40 years old. He's coming off a great season last season. The year before that, significant injury, out for the entire season. I understand why you do it. He was definitely top of the free agent market for pitching. They must have known they were going to lose DeGrom, or they were comfortable losing DeGrom with his injury history, and they would rather invest in Justin Verlander for a short-term contract. You link him up with a past teammate, Max Scherzer, which I'm sure also helps. Like, those guys are actually really tight. It was really fun to read some articles in The Athletic about them kind of like coming back together and being able to pitch together again, like those heyday years of the early 2010 Detroit Tigers.
Their relationship has certainly evolved. They were not always buddy-buddy. They did not always have the mutual admiration that they allegedly have this time around. It's
interesting. This worried me. If I'm a Mets fan, it worries me of like, is this a sideshow signing? Like, are we just making the sexy signing just for the headlines because we're losing Jacob deGrom, who, when healthy, is quite possibly the best pitcher in baseball, if not just the best pitcher in baseball when he's healthy? It's concerning. And when I look at metrics, I'm concerned of a guy who comes off a major season, then he has a great, bounce back campaign. And then the base of the numbers off is, do I have enough of a sample size to make a comfortable prediction to a guy who's 40 years old? But it's Justin Verlander. And when he went to Houston, he completely basically reshaped his image, and he turned back into the Hall of Fame pitcher that he didn't look like at the end of his Detroit years. And this is going to be common for me when we talk about the entire rotation of the Mets. There's some guys here that, do I trust that he's going to get all the way through the season at 40 years old? I don't know. I honestly don't know. And you pay a lot of money to kind of roll the dice on maybe a 70 or 30 or a 60-40 chance that you don't even have Verlander the entire season. That's a lot of money. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? You have a lot more faith, I think, in this rotation. You lose DeGrom, Verlander ate up about 175 innings. Scherzer dealt with major injuries. Like, are you really that comfortable that like Verlander is going to come in and produce the same, like a $43 million season?
I'm not one to sit here and say how much Verlander should or should not be paid.
That's a lot of money to be paid, though. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're Steve Cohen, you can afford it right until you can start putting together more of a minor league system and developing your own talent, I think what other choice do you have, right? You're deep into this, right? When you're giving a guy like Brandon Nimmo almost $200 million, when you have Mark Canha on the final year of a deal, you have Starling Marte not getting any younger, like you have to commit to this window that you have in front of you, right? And Steve Cohen has commented again and again that he wants to put his team in a position to win every single year that he's the owner. Now, Justin Verlander, I think what he did last year should quiet any concerns of any precipitous drop off in production, right? We can go over to his fan graphs and we can see his final year in Detroit. It looked like he was aging himself out of baseball, right? Or maybe aging himself out of the front end of rotations. He went to Houston. Verlander credits all of his success the last 5 years of his career to what Houston did. They lowered his arm slot a little bit, helped him reshape a couple of pitches. And you can see that 2018 to 2020 with the Astros, 256 ERA, 307 FIP, suffers a pretty significant injury, has to go get Tommy John, goes under the knife at the beginning of the 2020 season, misses all of 2021, comes back though, delivers 175 innings, wins an American League Cy Young Award. You look at how he did it, spin rates are still elite, velocity is still well above league average, command is fantastic, and command is usually that one thing where that first year back from Tommy John, you do struggle to locate your pitches. You struggle to command the strike zone the way that you have been able to in the past. Ranking in the 94th percentile in walk rate in year one after Tommy John, I think should give everyone all the confidence in the world that Justin Verlander is going to have another sensational season. Now, am I putting money on him at plus 700 to win the NL Cy Young? No. A couple of reasons. One, it's just really, really hard to do what he did last year, regardless of age. And now he is 40, right? I think it's only prudent to expect a little bit of regression. I still think he's worth going and getting to put him at the top of your rotation. You know that every time Justin Verlander toes the rubber, you're going to have a good opportunity to win the baseball game. My larger concern with Verlander is the Mets' long history of not being able to keep people healthy, right? Houston is a well-oiled organization that year after year just seems to get the best out of whatever they have on their 40-man roster. Now, the Mets, the reason I'm so high on the Mets, the rotation and the team overall, is they have a lot of depth. I think Steve Cohen has anticipated that Verlander's probably going to miss a month-ish, maybe 1 or 2 stints on the IL. Max Scherzer, like we saw last year, going to spend significant time on the injured list. They have 8 major league quality starting pitchers on their 40-man roster, 3 of which have options with Lucchesi, Hernandez, and David Peterson. So I think having a manager like Buck Showalter, he's going to be able to pull the strings. He's going to be able to sort of load manage these guys throughout the season. I don't think you're going to see Verlander or Scherzer on the IL for phantom injuries, but there's going to be no need to push Verlander through any sort of lower half injury or a back issue or anything like that. And I think just based off what we saw with Verlander last season, didn't give up hardly any hard contact, limited a lot of the damage. He's still got the same deep pitch mix that he's always had. Very intellectual on the mound. So I think even if he happens to lose a little bit of his spin rates or a little bit of his velo, the floor with Verlander is incredibly high. And I think that's what makes him worth the $40+ million that Steve Cohen went and gave him this offseason.
Yeah, he's Charlie Morton type, you know?
Oh my God, Keegan. Oh, that is the biggest insult that you could give to Justin Verlander.
Listen, it was I feel like you said, you kind of have to make that signing, and I understood it when they did it. I was shocked, truly shocked, because the things that Verlander has said about Houston has just been glowing, and he's been there for such a long time now.
His brother was shocked that Verlander left the Astros. I mean, he was telling everybody he was going back to Houston, and then Verlander's on his way to the Mets.
And you leave to he's got to see something. I don't know if he just saw the money and just ran toward the money. I don't know if he's a believer the same way that you are, that the Mets are one, like he's the piece that could get them over the hump. Where do you sit on the loss of DeGrom for the Mets? Did the Mets just lose the best pitcher in baseball, in your opinion, despite the injuries, or did they actually maybe get a little bit lucky letting DeGrom go to Texas in free agency, and then you get a stopgap in Justin Verlander for a year or two?
Did they lose the best pitcher in baseball? I think that's a difficult argument. I think, did they lose the most talented pitcher in baseball? Absolutely. The the things that Jacob deGrom can do on a baseball field, I don't think anybody else in the league can even approach what Jacob deGrom can do on the mound. The issue is that Jacob deGrom just hasn't done it all that often for the Mets. You look in 2021, he threw 92 innings. He made 15 starts. Last year, he made 11 starts through 64 innings. Baseball, we talk about this all the time, right? We've mentioned it in the last couple of videos of it's as much about durability and availability as it is about talent. And the one thing that Jacob deGrom has is talent. The one thing that he absolutely has not had in recent years is the durability. And if I'm the Mets and I see a guy like Justin Verlander, he just had his significant arm issue 2 years ago, right? Odds of that happening again so soon, very low. Verlander's been a stalwart throughout his career, but prior to that, he really never had any major injuries. If I know that I'm going to get 175 innings out of Justin Verlander, and he might not be quite as dominant as deGrom when the guys are going head-to-head or when they're both available, I will eat that knowing that I'll have Verlander there for the majority of the season, and that when we get to October, Verlander will at least get to make a start. Where deGrom, you don't know that, right? So if you go get $40 million to deGrom, you go get the most talented pitcher in baseball. I think one of the most talented pitchers of all time, at least in my generation. I've never seen anyone do what he's able to do on a baseball field on the mound. You just don't know for certain that you're going to pay $40 million and to get even a single playoff outing from him.
So where do you sit then if durability is one of the most important things, then where do you sit on Max Scherzer? So Max Scherzer comes out last year, right? Second half of the season, lights out. Dominant pitcher in baseball. I mean, he ends the season with a 2.62 whip, 0.91 whip. I'm sorry. I misspoke there. 2.62 FIP, and then the whip of 0.91. The guy came out and dominated the second half, but, he only pitched you 145 innings. So, where do you see Scherzer fitting in? Do you think it seems like every year we run into some significant Scherzer injury, at least for the last 3 years. Something puts him on a 10-day IL. Someone puts him out for a month. So, Where you sit on his durability?
He's going to miss a month. Realistically, he's going to miss a month. But
see, how could you, okay, hold on. So how can you say Mets are going all the way and we're going to lose our star pitcher for a month in Max Scherzer? And, oh, by the way, also Verlander, let's pencil him out a couple of weeks when you have the Phillies and the Braves in that division.
Yeah, but the Mets have the depth. But this is what I'm talking about, though. They have the depth. They have 8 starting pitchers who would be in any big league rotation. The luxury to be able to send Joey Lucchesi, Eliseo Hernandez, and David Peterson to the minor leagues and have them ready when you have doubleheaders, when you have injuries, when you have weird spots in the schedule, when you have a 10-day IL stint from Verlander, from Max Scherzer. That's what's going to make this team so durable throughout the regular season. They don't have the most durable pieces, right? Max Scherzer will miss some time. But when you look at what Max Scherzer did, this is what he did the second half of the season after he came back from his IL stint. So there you go. He was out from May 18th to July, or May 19th to July 4th, right? But when he came back across his next 14 starts, 190 ERA, a 220 FIP, the guy was damn near unhittable. I mean, you look in that span, except for a couple of starts in mid-August where he gave up 4 runs in back-to-back starts. The guy was putting you in a position to win every single game out there. And even those 2 games against Atlanta and the Yankees that you see in the middle of the screen here, if you have a competent offense, 4 runs is not a death sentence, right? You can compete in the late innings. So if I can get 22-ish starts from Max Scherzer and know that he will be healthy by the time October gets around, which Max Scherzer always is, right? Max Scherzer will be there in October, which you can't say about deGrom, because you can say what you want about Max Scherzer. He's had nagging injuries. He has not had season-ending injuries, which has not been the case with deGrom. So if you get Scherzer and you can get him through the regular season and have him be healthy by the time October comes around, sign me up. Joey Lucchesi can have 5 or 7 starts, or Tyler McGill going in there can have 5 or 7 starts. You know what I mean? I'm fine with it. Max Scherzer is one of the few truly premier pitchers in baseball. I mean, there's a reason he's 8-1 to win the Cy Young. I'm not betting that again because I think he's going to miss too much time to really be a serious candidate for that award. But the talent there is truly undeniable.
Yeah, and listen, if Verlander and Scherzer have healthy seasons, and I eat my words here, then I totally see how you come to the conclusion that the Mets are easily winning this division, right? But I have a lot of concerns, those 2 guys at their ages, and if they're able to produce the same way. It's funny that those 2 games that Max Scherzer gave up 4 home runs. One was against Atlanta, who I picked to win the division, and the other one was against the Yankees, which is just that's just sure happenstance, but I just think that's hilarious. So moving on in their rotation, we got to talk about Kodai Senga, because that he is going to be one of the most interesting stories in baseball this year. I always love it when the Japanese players finally come over to the United States, especially if what they were doing in Japan was just nuts. So what are your initial thoughts on Kodai Senga? He's going to be one of the most interesting stories in baseball this year, and the only pitcher on the Mets rotation under the age of 34. And he's still 30.
He's going to learn from some of the best to ever do it. I mean, you can't get more experience and more individual accolades in one dugout. There's a reason that he's 60-1 to win the NL Cy Young Award this year. It's easy to look at what he did last year overseas and look at the 11-6 record, antiquated stat, right? But the sub-2 ERA, the decent K percentage, all of that stuff. And because he was a big name and talked about a lot in the media in the offseason, it's easy to look at him and say, oh my God, the Mets have a third ace. He's not an ace. He's one of the better number 3 pitchers in all of baseball, but I think there's definitely concerns. I think command is going to be a little bit of, I don't want to go as far as say as an issue, but it'll be something definitely to monitor, especially as he adjusts to big league hitters and having to go through lineups multiple times. It's really the durability, right? I mean, like you're paying for a guy that you hope will give you 150 innings, 175 innings, and will give you an opportunity to win every single time he's on the mound, whether he's healthy for the entire season or the majority of the season. The one thing that you just can't have with Senga is a guy who spends 3 months on the injured list, right? Because you do have a lot of risk inherently having a 38-year-old and a 40-year-old as your 2 top guys in the rotation. There's just no getting around that, right? This is a big, all your chips in the center of the table move of we want 1 year out of Scherzer, 1 year out of Verlander, and make a run at this, and then they'll figure out next year when next year is here, right? I think Senga is a perfect guy to follow these 2 in the rotation. The stuff is there, right? I mean, like we've heard Pete Alonso talk about, there's just his forkball, right? There's just no comp to anything that Pete Alonso has seen in Major League Baseball to this pitch. So I think he brings a good bit of uniqueness and variety to the rotation that you're not going to see with Verlander and Scherzer. He should fit in well. But again, I'm not expecting stardom from him just because he has a big name and a lot of media attention. I think there's going to be growing pains, but I think, again, similar to Scherzer and Verlander, I think a very high floor.
I like Kodai Senga a lot. However, I think you glossed over his issue and his command, and I don't think it is a small issue. I think it's actually a pretty large one for him. Diving into that, in 2020 in Japan, he had an 11.3 walk percentage, which is horrendous, and that's in Japan. And not to throw shade at the Japanese league, it's just that it's a little bit different in the MLB. In 21 and 2022, he was still at 8.5%. So that's huge, and it really is because of the pitch arsenal that he has. So as that forkball is, you're just talking about with Alonso. And sure, there's nothing to base it off of, but he relies on throwing that out of the zone quite a lot. And if guys can lay off it, he's going to get behind in counts. And his other 2 pitches, it's 88 mile per hour cutter and a slider with a ton of movement on it, 83 miles. He tries to get guys out by throwing the ball out of the strike zone. And even Frankie Lindor, when they interviewed him, and Frankie actually did pretty well against him in batting practice. And he was like, you know what, I'm kind of happy that I don't have to study him. But that's what kind of told me something a little bit. Like, I feel like once people really start watching this guy pitch, it's really just going to be, can we lay off him? And he gets behind and counts. And he threw at 98-99 against McNeil in batting practice the other day, which is huge when you think about Senga, because Senga, when he started, he was a relief pitcher in Japan, and his fastball only hit 92 miles per hour when he was young. And now it's hitting 98, 99 in practice. I don't know if that's propaganda by the Mets that they're kind of like putting that out there.
I mean, it's the spring training radar guns too. Those are not the higher quality.
So I think that's kind of nuts. I don't think you'll hit 98, 99, but in Japan when he was pitching for some elite teams, and he was pitching for a team that in 7 years won 6 championships. I mean, Senga was the ace of a championship squad in a pretty serious league in Japan. He's been in some really big moments. He tried to come to the MLB and try to get posted years ago, and the team said no. They're like, we're not posting you. Like, you're too valuable to us. And now he was finally able to come into the MLB as a free agent, but he could have come into the MLB at the age of 27. And that would have been huge, I think, at the time. I'm a big believer in him, though. That forkball's got some scary stats in Japan. So he had a whiff percentage of 50% and a 40% chase rate on that forkball. And the reason why is, and Alonso alludes to it in his interview, it comes at you the same way as a fastball does. It's like it's coming high, and then if you watch it, it just drops completely. So Alonso's like, the exact words from Alonso is, he got me on it, referring to the forkball. I have nothing to base that pitch off of. And considering like Pete Alonso, no joke, is one of the best hitters in baseball, lefties or righties. And he's like, that pitch was coming at me like high in the zone, like a fastball. That's what McNeil said also. Like that pitch was coming at me high.
It tunnels well.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden it falls off. So if you have guys like McNeil and Alonso who are like, that's a tricky pitch, I think that's great for Mets fans. I don't think that's going to be a fluke pitch. My issue for him is I think he'll get behind in counts. And he also had concerning home run numbers in Japan a couple years ago where he gave up like 1.4 home runs per 9 innings. And I think it was because he would get behind and he would like throw up a meatball fastball without a lot of control on it. And then guys were just knocking the shit out of it. So I think there's some concerns. I do like the story though. Like he tried to come to the US, couldn't make it. Now he's finally here. He gets, and also, by the way, missed this. When he was asked what team he wanted to go play for, Senga said that he wanted to play 1 for a contender, but 2 with a top pitching staff for development. So he wasn't just looking for the money. He wasn't just looking to, come. One of the key points was, I want to go somewhere where they're going to help me develop my arsenal. And then after the Jeff McNeil at bat, McNeil said that Senga came up to him afterward and was basically, "You're one of the best hitters in baseball. Please tell me how my pitches were received by you. Like, what can I do?" And McNeil was like, "I'm just so glad this guy's on my team." So I think as a Mets fan, you got a lot of things to be excited about. I think with Kodai saying, it's not a Japanese player who's going to come and shrink in the moment. He's been on that championship caliber squad. He's got great pitches. I'm just really curious how MLB hitters are going to adapt to that. And if some of the top hitters in the game and the Mets are basically saying, "Oh shit, this is some scary stuff," then it's the one pitcher I look in their rotation and I say, "Oh wait, like let's see how that goes." Like talk about if that's real and he can fool a lot of top hitters, and they just saw Verlander and Scherzer the days before them. I mean, that's a pretty deadly triple on the mound for the Mets.
Look, I'll just say this. If Senga overperforms my expectations of him and we get 160 innings out of Verlander and Scherzer, the Mets will win 110 games.
I'm clipping that one.
They will. Again, it's a big if, right? Are you going to have those guys on the field? But yeah, it's the front 3 in this rotation is very, very intimidating if they're at their best, right? I know you can say that about a lot of teams, but you have guys who have won Cy Young awards. Verlander's won an MVP award, right? These guys have pitched in big Verlander, Scherzer, and Senga, right, have all pitched in big moments. They've all been an ace of a staff in one place or another for teams that have been contenders. They've all pitched in World Series. They've done these things, right? And they've all done these things very recently, right? So what's not to like? What's not to like? I mean, you can pick at me for the age, and I'm sure there's a wheelchair joke or a walker joke coming in here soon, but these are talented guys and they know what they're doing.
I don't make those kind of jokes. I don't know. That's slander. Well, talking about age though, in a pitcher that's actually a really awesome kind of storyline. Let's go on to Jose Quintana and what he did when he was in St. Louis. You walked me through it in our meeting prep, and it's well worth walking it through again about what he did to kind of transform himself back into a quality pitcher, and one that's I think he's going to actually be a huge deal for the Mets after losing guys like Bassett and Walker, who were going to solid inning eaters for the Mets in the back half of that rotation. Let's talk about Quintana. Let's walk through guys through that pitch mix and what he was able to do.
Yeah, so I'll start out. I'll just share the basic Savant stuff like we tend to do, and you can see if you just look at his Savant baseline metrics here, it doesn't look overly sexy, right? You can see last year he did a pretty good job limiting hard contact, but didn't get tons of swing and misses. Roughly league average when it comes to command. Velocity's not great. Spin rates are nothing to really write home about. But getting traded last year, mid-season, we'll go back to his game logs, and again, you can access all this on Fangraphs. You can see struggled a little bit at the end of his tenure with Pittsburgh. Got to St. Louis. All you got to do is hit shift here, and then you can hit shift on wherever you want to end it here. Across his last 12 starts, a 2.01 ERA, a 2.60 FIP in that span, did not allow more than 2 earned runs in any of those starts. You can see consistently working deep into the ball game, except for this one start right here, went 2 2/3, getting into the 5th, 6th inning on a consistent basis. This is what you want out of a number 4 starter.
Yeah, that's money right there.
You do not need Jose Quintana to be a Justin Verlander. You don't need him to be a Max Scherzer. You don't need him to be a Cy Young candidate, and that's why you see he's 150 to 1 to win the Cy Young, right? This guy's not making $40 million. But I think his acquisition went under the radar by a lot, because if you look at what he's done recently, right? We could just go back to 2018. 4.67 ERA and a 4.17 FIP it's rather uninspiring, right? So you look at this, and we've talked about this with other pitchers in different videos of, okay, was it a one-hit wonder? Is he going to regress to what we've seen the last 4 or 5 years over a larger sample size? Or is what he found last year truly going to help unlock something and help him find sustainable success going forward? So what do? We look at the pitch mix, right? Is there something that he was doing that helped him be more effective in certain situations? And one thing that you can really take note of here is, let's take a look at his 2022 stuff here. Against right-handed batters, and we'll filter this on month so you can get this throughout the month in the season. Started off the year throwing this changeup at a pretty high clip. Sort of lost that in the middle of the season, and if you remember, if we went back to that game log, he struggled towards the end of his tenure with Pittsburgh prior to the trade deadline. Sort of bottomed out with his changeup usage. Brought it back towards the end of the season, and what do you see? He held right-handed batters to a 188 batting average with his changeup late in the season, right? He has multiple plus offerings with the curveball and the sinker. And if you find good, like I always refer to them as like Goldilocks zone usage rates for your pitches, you don't necessarily need to have overpowering stuff to be able to mow down opposing lineups or just to give your team a competitive opportunity to win baseball games, right? So if Jose Quintana can utilize this, and if he can continue to control these splits against righties and lefties, which he did a much better job of last year, right? So you can look at in 2022, dominant against lefties. That's fantastic, but it's not going to make you 150 innings type of arm, right? His ability to neutralize right-handed hitters as well, holding them to roughly a base runner per inning, a little bit on the higher end there. That's what he needs to be able to do on a consistent basis. And this is something that he was unable to do. So if you go back to, look at 2021 was the season before that, he was still very, very effective against lefties. He just couldn't figure out how to get right-handed batters out. You can't survive in the major leagues with a 5.73 FIP against half of the plate, because especially in modern baseball, teams will stack opposing lineups against you to give you a nightmare on the mound, right? You'll see a lineup, especially lefties. It's not uncommon to face a lineup that has 7 or 8 or sometimes even 9 right-handed bats in the order. So Quintana's ability to get righties out is going to be something to watch this season. Again, he's a little bit on the older end, but if he truly has found something with this increased changeup usage again, and we've seen it with Colin McHugh, we've seen it with dozens of other pitchers around baseball and dozens of different organizations around baseball, this could be one of the most underrated 4th pitchers in the league. And if you need a late round flyer on your fantasy team, or you just need a depth piece, Jose Quintana, I think, is a great guy to target.
Can we stop giving away to our league who we're going to clearly be drafting?
I thought we got him blocked. I thought they're not able to access this content.
To all those who are possibly watching, we don't like Quintana that much. But yeah, I think great addition. It kind of goes back to, they get him for $13 million. I think a good signing by the Mets. Great guy to put in the back of your rotation. Same conversation we had about, the aging star and Starling Marte. I think it's even better with Quintana because he's not as old as that. So you might have him for a year or two, not just, going into. And
Quintana's erased those splits, right? We talked about Morton really struggling to get lefties out.
Yeah, right.
Morton's not going to be able to fix that just throwing a curveball and a fastball. But Quintana has a little bit deeper of a pitch mix. Even if he runs into some trouble throughout the season, having a guy like Scherzer, Verlander, and having the Mets brass around him to help figure those things out, I would be very, very surprised if Quintana is not an above-average arm in that rotation this season.
Last guy rounding out the rotation for the Mets is our old friend Cookie from the Cleveland Guardians. He came out and pitched 152 innings last season. Great for him. Honestly, when he was, I have so many fond memories of him pitching back in Cleveland and just the workhorse that he was. And, it's been kind of sad. Like the last 3 years, I think, 2 years ago, he throws about like 60 innings. The year before, just in 2021, he was throwing about like 50, and now finally he has a season where we finally kind of like see him in a healthy season. Do you think he keeps that up? Do you think that, that was just a true fluke, because we haven't really seen what he's been able to do since 2018?
I really like Carlos Carrasco, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. We met him at season ticket holder events a number of times. Just always a really genuine individual, treats you like a human being. I hate to say it, but I think he could be out of this rotation at some point this year. And I think this says more about the depth that the Mets have with those 6, 7, and 8 guys in the rotation than it does about Cookie completely falling off of a map. The big thing with him is, if you go back and you look through his game log, and I encourage you to do this individually as well, you can look at the splits. He was very, very good against weak teams last year. And he's a guy that can go out there and get you a quality start, right? Go out there, get 18 outs, keep the other team to 3 runs or less against weaker opponents. There were just too many of these starts against better teams, like the Braves, giving up 3 runs and 2 innings. Even this start against the Nationals, giving up 5 and 2 2/3, a division opponent that had seen him a couple of times already that season. 6 runs against the Astros, 5 runs against the Astros, 5 runs against the Angels before they totally collapsed last season. You can see early in the year he gave it the 4 to the Mariners, 8 to the Cardinals. That's more the concern with Carrasco in my mind. Of do I think he's washed? No, right? But I think the durability is a concern, of course. He gives up a ton of hard contact. Not the worst thing in the world for a 5th guy in the rotation. The thing is, he's going to have some pressure on him because the Mets have very high quality 6, 7, and 8 options that could be promoted to the major league team at any point. The Mets also have an owner that will not hesitate whatsoever to go get an upgrade if he feels like he needs an upgrade already in the big leagues during the regular season. With Carrasco, it's really, there's just a lot of things working against him. Again, you can go back and you can look at the innings that you mentioned, right? Only the 80 innings in 2019, pandemic year. Can't really take much away from that. 2021 with the Mets, though, only 53 innings. Really struggled on the mound when he was out there. ERA north of 6. And I know not all of that has just been physical injuries, right? Like I know he's dealt with a lot more serious ailments that he's had to overcome, but at this point in his career, the issue still remains of how many innings are you going to be able to get out of him? And I think this is, again, where I'm not uber confident in Carrasco to go out there and look like he did back in his Cleveland heyday. It's me sitting here thinking, if Carrasco's great, that's amazing. If he's not great, go get Luke Casey, go get Tyler McGill, go trade for someone, right? Like the Mets are going to be able to do that. And that's where I see the depth of this 40-man roster making whatever Carlos Carrasco we see this season less of a risk and less of a problem for this rotation than he probably would be with another team that would be forced to run him out there every 5 days, even if he's the worst version of himself.
So, Commish, let me ask you a question. We come to May, and we see Carlos Carrasco struggling, becoming more of a liability at that 5th spot in the rotation. Or again, like you said, we're staggering the pitchers, but we're just seeing we're losing games because Carrasco is starting and needs to take a seat. Who's your 5th guy? Who's your guy that you're excited about? I know you said that you have a bunch of guys in that lineup that, if the entire latter half of the rotation went down, you're still good and deep. But who's your first? Who's your guy who's going to immediately come in and be like, this is the next dude in the rotation?
I think David Peterson, with what he did last year, has earned the right to be that first guy out of the minor leagues, assuming that he does get optioned and that's where he starts the season. If you look at what he did last year, it was actually rather impressive, right? Especially after what he did in 2021 in a smaller sample size with the ERA approaching 6. Last year came out and just threw the ball really well, right? 3.83 ERA, sub 4 xERA, like all of the expected stats support that he actually made a pretty substantial gain there. So I think just the sample size, he threw 105 innings last year. I think that gives him a leg up on some of these other guys. Luke Casey, if you go back and look at him, we have, I have his stats right here as well. Didn't pitch at all last year because of the injury. 2020 was limited as well. So I think there's just more of an uphill climb there, although I do think there's upside. And Luke Casey was starting to figure things out in a pretty significant way towards the end of that 2021 season before he got hurt. You can look at his last, let's say 5 starts before he got hurt. 22 2/3 innings, 24 strikeouts, so over a strikeout an inning, only 3 earned runs allowed in that span. So you can see over here, I mean, great ERA, great FIP, underlying metrics. Tyler McGill's another guy, and I think this just highlights the ridiculous amount of depth that the Mets have that is just an embarrassment of riches that other teams don't have. McGill last year came out, he had velocity that no one had ever seen from him before at the start of the season. Had a 2.43 ERA through his first 6 starts. The thing that happened, of course, was he has a pretty violent delivery, and it was something that caught up to him rather quickly. Mid-May, he went out there. He was pitching through some pain against the Washington Nationals, gave up 8 runs and 1 1/3 inning. Never really recovered the rest of the season, even after he came back the second time in September, just as a reliever, had a 6 ERA and a FIP approaching 5. Had some scoreless appearances in here, showing that he can get the job done, but probably would not be the Mets' first option to go into the rotation. More so, I think, just for health reasons than anything else. Like, could he make a spot start? Yeah. And all these guys will be stretched out to be starters, but I think that's a guy that the Mets would prefer to tread a little bit more carefully with. I think Hernandez is a really interesting case as well. I mean, he had one outstanding year for Miami in a very, very small sample size during the COVID campaign, and everybody thought he was going to break out the next year, and then came back, didn't throw a lot of innings, regressed sharply again last year before he just was bounced out of the rotation. So it's a terrible answer to your question. I don't know, right? A lot of it will have to depend on who is synced up on which day, because like say Luke Casey is synced up on whatever Carrasco's day in the rotation is. It just makes the most sense to bring him up. But could they push McGill off a day? Could they push David Peterson off a day to sync with Carrasco? I think that's a realistic possibility. Obviously, the best case scenario is Carrasco is just pitching well into May or June, and you can utilize the depth that the Mets have with all of these guys having options to give guys a spot start if they're on the 10-day IL or things like that. And for people who are unaware, like when you have an option, what that means is the Mets can send these guys to the minor leagues. They can send Peterson, McGill, Hernandez, and Luke Casey to the minor leagues without having to risk losing them to another team through the waiver process, which is a really, really nice luxury to have. And it's rare to find veteran talent that still has minor league options left and guys that are willing to go to the minor leagues, because when guys like that get to the latter portion of their career, a lot of them will just request a release. They don't want to go on the bus in AAA and still be living that type of lifestyle. So the fact that the Mets have got these guys to buy in, and Showalter seems to have a plan for these guys, and they've talked about it during spring training, during their interviews, of they understand that they're part of the winning formula as members of the 40-man, even if they're not going to be on the opening day roster. That's what you go get a guy like Buck Showalter for, in my opinion. It's not always just about what you see him doing day-to-day in games with the bullpen usage and the lineup card. Being able to manage personalities, being able to get guys to buy into the larger vision, that's what's going to help the Mets win 100-plus games this season. And I don't know if every single manager in the league would be able to get that out of what is really, truly an embarrassment of riches. But again, you need guys to buy into what they're doing.
I agree. It will be that'll be a rough conversation. I think that was definitely hard to talk about with Peterson. I mean, puts up those kind of numbers and then gets sent back to AAA. It's kind of like, what am I supposed to do in order to keep my spot on this roster? You know what I mean? So
yeah, but you know, the other thing that Peterson has to be a realist, right? Gave up a ton of hard contact last year. So I know the stats ended up being good, but he's far from a finished product, right? There are definite flaws in his game, and could he go latch onto a rotation elsewhere in Major League Baseball? Of course. I think somebody would for sure want his services, but to have an opportunity to be part of a winning team, like that matters to some guys more than other guys. And it will be something that's worth monitoring. But I think the idea that all 4 of those guys go rogue and all of a sudden don't want to buy into the vision.
No. I'm not saying that, obviously.
Well, no, I'm just saying,
I'm just sticking to Peterson, right? Based off the role that he took on when 2 major guys were not available for the Mets and what he produced. You know, it's a little bit different, I think, than the others. But, you know, we talk about guys who are going to be coming out of the bullpen. You know, we can finish up talking about the Mets bullpen. You know, they just signed Edwin Diaz to one of the most lucrative contracts for a reliever in the history of baseball. You know, you still got guys like Adam Ottavino, David Robertson, some, you know, crafty veterans. You said the Braves probably have the deepest bullpen, and I'm looking at some of the names in the Mets bullpen, and I'm thinking to myself, that's a pretty damn good bullpen, especially if the commission is telling me that the guys like McGill and Peterson and all these other long-term guys could also be serving in a bullpen role. So what do you think on the Mets?
Well, all of those guys, all of the surplus guys in the rotation are going to be stretched out to be starters. There's no plans for them to be in the bullpen to start the season. Of course, everything in baseball goes out the window when you start having injuries in May and June, and you just got to figure things out. So it's not to say that those guys won't be used in relief. We saw McGill come back and be used in relief towards the latter end of last season. Edwin Diaz just got signed to the most lucrative deal in Major League history for a reliever. This gets back to your point of having an owner that can just retain talent, right? Edwin Diaz not only was the best reliever in baseball last year, he became an icon in the city of New York with.
He really did.
With his walkout. Yeah, so it's bringing back a guy like Diaz, I think, is really exciting. I think it locks down the ninth inning. Love it. Ottavino, and I can just pull up some of the data that we pulled here as well, so everybody can look and see as we're going through this. It's impressive stuff, right? Like to be able to put together a bullpen with Diaz, with Ottavino, Robertson coming back and being fantastic last season in a not insignificant workload, right? Throwing over 60 innings. I think the larger concerns for me with the Mets are Showalter and Cohen, and everyone just keeps talking about they're prioritizing bullpen flexibility. And what that means to me is you don't know who's going to be in the bullpen on a night-to-night basis, right? You have your back end here with Diaz, Ottavino, Robertson. Those guys should be fantastic. I think you can get more out of guys like Drew Smith and Brooks Raley, but like Sam Coonrod, Tommy Hunter, like those are guys that are iffy to even make the opening day roster. And I think you're going to see a little bit of musical chairs with those, like a good chunk of the bullpen on a weekly basis based on usage, based on matchups. If you have a double header, if there's some situations where you just don't have a lot of healthy arms in the bullpen, I think you'll see guys come up from the minor leagues. You'll see guys get sent back down. That's to me what is more of a wild card with the Mets. And I think if there is a reason that their season does go south, I think it is the fact that Diaz just signed a new contract, and we've seen time and time again that first year after getting a new deal, guys are just a little bit less focused with their workouts, or a little bit less focused on the field. I'm not saying Diaz will have a 4 ERA or anything like that, but he might. I think it's just you're naive if you're not going to expect a little bit of regression from Diaz. And I think, again, you're asking guys like Ottavino, who's 37, David Robertson, who's 38, to contribute another 120 innings between the two of them. It's a lot. So I think the bullpen is an area that I would not be surprised if the Mets are pretty aggressive even early in the season on the trade market if guys become available. I don't think they'll wait till July. I think they'll go snatch up anybody that they can. There's also the idea of bringing some guys out of the minor leagues and just having a fresh bullpen. This happened a couple of years ago with the Astros, where at the start of the season, you're like, oh my God, the bullpen's a huge weakness for this team. But just by the fact that they weren't overused, they were able to overperform expectations a lot. So getting depth from Scherzer, from Verlander, from Senga, from Quintana, and from Cookie, or whoever that fifth guy, I think that'll go a long way in being able to minimize this little bit of a deficiency in the roster. But I mean, they're coming off a season. The Mets were 7th in FIP as a relief core last year as a team. So it's there. I mean, it would be surprising for me to see them fall outside of the top 10. It's just, this is definitely the one area of weakness in the roster if you can find one. Pete Alonso, 15-1 to win the MVP. Last season, Pete Alonso, people forget, the guy almost died legitimately. Like, he was in a very, very scary car crash, got thrown through his windshield prior to opening day, and then was just fine. Played 160 games.
Then played 160 games.
Yeah, and then
like a Paul Bunyan story.
Genuinely, and he set the Mets record for RBIs in a season. The most impressive thing in my mind with Pete Alonso is what he's been able to do year over year as a hitter. This is a guy who consistently has gotten better every year since he's debuted. And I'll pull up his savant here, and we'll walk you through it. Last year, Pete Alonso, you can see a lot of red here, which is always great. Still chasing too many pitches out of the strike zone, but hits the crap out of the baseball. We've been knowing this, right? He's won the home run derby a couple of times, but the 65th percentile in K rate, so striking out fewer and fewer percentage of plate appearances than the league average hitter is truly remarkable when you go back to his rookie season and you see that he was in the 18th percentile. And we talked about this in another video as well of what you want to look for in a guy to see, okay, like, is this sustainable? Is you want to look at his swing decisions at the plate, right? And if you go to Fangraphs, you can take a look at this and you can see what is Alonso doing, right? And contact percentage is the amount of times that you're making contact with a pitch outside of the strike zone. So if you see 10 pitches outside the strike zone, and you swing it 10 of them, and you make contact 7 times, you have a 70% O contact percentage. Z contact is pitches in the strike zone. So if you swing 10 times and you make contact 8 times, then you have an 80% Z contact percentage. It really is that simple. It's just some of the abbreviations and the acronyms and all of that is a little bit inaccessible for some of these advanced analytics, but you can see he's made major strides here. His rookie season, 62% O contact percentage, over 5% better last season. Z contact percentage up about 4%. So when he's getting pitches in the strike zone that he can do damage with, he's taking advantage of those opportunities. The O contact percentage, meaning that he's fouling more pitches off. He's earning another pitch at the plate, giving the pitcher another opportunity to make a mistake. His contact percentage as a result overall has gone up over 5%. It's really impressive. It's really, and the swinging strike rate, this is just how often he's swinging and missing at pitches. He's cut that down as well. So when he's deciding to swing, he's making a lot more contact. And when you have a guy like Pete Alonso, who's in the 99th percentile in max exit velocity, can hit the baseball as hard as anyone else in the league. He's in the 76th percentile in average exit velocity. So he does it on a consistent basis. He barrels up more baseballs than most guys in baseball.
I mean, the guy,
my God, like, other than the defense is atrocious, and I don't even want to get into that because the MVP voters won't get into that. They won't give a damn. Pete Alonso has every opportunity to win most valuable player, and at 15-1, I think it's a great stab. The other thing is, if you are as high as I am on the New York Mets, the MVP award, it's not uncommon for teams to have multiple guys from their team in the MVP conversation if the team is winning games. Last year we saw Arenado and Goldschmidt both in the conversation.
Oh yeah.
Lindor and Pete Alonso were both in the conversation. So if the Mets win games, if the Mets flirt with 100 wins, Pete Alonso's in a big market. He's had success finishing in the top 10 and voting for this award in the past. He continues to get better year over year. This is a bet at 15-1. I can't imagine a scenario outside of injury where this doesn't mature into at least like a plus 500 or plus 400 by middle of the summer.
And in a league where the baseball is actively trying to promote more offense, and they built the rules around it, all these new rules to go along with it, and you got Pete Alonso sitting in a big market, and he just looks the part of an American hero, big old 6'3" dude and playing for the New York Mets, the lovable Mets. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he hits 50 bombs this season. I mean, MVP voters already love a guy who hits a bunch of home runs, even if he's horrendous in every other facet of his game. If Alonso comes out and has an amazing season, his on-base percentage too has just steadily increased each year, which is what you see of all those numbers. So like he was at 344 in 2021. He finished up 2022 at 352. So he's becoming a more disciplined hitter at the plate. And just in a game that we are gearing up towards of like, we want to see more offense, and Pete Alonso comes out and has an amazing offensive season, I would not be shocked at all. It would almost be like, you couldn't script a better thing if you're Rob Manfred for the league to have New York City produce an MVP and Pete Alonso and the Mets to win the way that you're talking about.
Oh yeah. And one thing too, on top of all of that, which are all great points, what I like to look for in Cy Young candidates that I'm going to invest in preseason or MVP candidates I'm going to invest in preseason is them being one adjustment away from unlocking their full potential, right? And last year, Dylan Cease was probably our best example. He was 30-1 preseason, invested in him, and we said all he's got to do is improve his command, right? And if he improves his command, he's going to be one of the best pitchers in baseball. And he got to a point last year where he flirted with Justin Verlander. They were both at plus money down the stretch to win the Cy Young, and Verlander pulled away down the end. Cease was dealing with some arm fatigue and things like that. But Pete Alonso's in the same situation where he continues to improve on his zone contact rates. And you can see, again, like we'll go back 2019 to 2020. You can see this K rate continually getting better and better and better. If he can finally just stop chasing so many pitches, he is going to put a ton of pressure on opposing pitchers, and there will really be no way to pitch around Pete Alonso. And the other thing is here, we talk a lot about, like we talked about it with Michael Harris, right? A guy who really kills fastballs, but if you have a guy that has good breaking balls or good off speed pitches, you can figure out ways to get around him. Pete Alonso is not a guy that you can throw junk to and get away with it, right? Mashes fastballs. He also mashes breaking balls. He also mashes off speed pitches, right? When you go down here and you look at his slugging percentage against all of these pitches, last year he was actually better against breaking balls and off speed pitches than he was fastballs. So
Yeah,
in a league that continues to throw more and more junk every year, Pete Alonso is a hitter that is so well equipped to continue to thrive. And again, we've seen the durability, right? Of course, baseball is a game that is obsessed with counting stats, right? You mentioned the home runs. So you need a guy who's going to play 150 games to put himself in the conversation for this award. What has he done? 161 games his rookie year, 57 out of 60 games during the COVID campaign, 152 games in 2021, and then 160 again last year. This is a guy who wants to be on the baseball field. He is that American hero like you talked about. Like, this is not a guy who you could ever approach with load management, anything. This guy will be in the lineup day in and day out. If he's healthy, my God, invest in Pete Alonso as much as you can. Fantasy-wise, futures market, betting-wise, DFS, all of it.
It is baseball's wet dream to have Aaron Judge and Pete Alonso in a home run race of historic proportions. It is. Like that. Like, if that were to happen, baseball could not want something more than two guys in New York literally just bombing all over the place. And Pete Alonso, I think, is due for that for sure. I think we'll talk about Judge in the future. You talked about something that I kind of want to go on to about unlocking something to turn yourself back into an MVP candidate. And I think that's a great segue to Lindor. Lindor is a great story going into 2023 because our boy got an appendectomy, and now he's saying, hey, I no longer have the oblique problem that I've had going on the last 2 seasons. And when you pull up some of his numbers back when he was playing for Cleveland, the offense production has just been weirdly silent, really weirdly silent, right? So scroll down to his OPS so everyone can get an idea. You can look at his slugging on base, but like just to give an overall picture, right? Look at those 3 years in Cleveland. So 2017 to 2019, look at those slugging numbers: 505, 518, 519. So all those 3 years, 514 slug, 342 on base percentage. What happened to that power hitting is a question that I ask myself, like when I look at these numbers. And Lindor's always had a glove, and he had one last year. I mean, he had a 13 OAA, one of the best, and only set, like, he was right behind Dansby Swanson essentially for that Gold Glove consideration. And he was doing that in Cleveland, but he was an offensive powerhouse in Cleveland. Like, we were talking about, how do you not pay for Frankie Lindor to stay? And those conversations were heated in this area. And you look at some of those power numbers, they've dropped off the face of the earth. And now he's saying, I've been dealing with like this side injury for a long time. And that's, again, lower back injuries, hand injuries, side injuries, anything like, again, that twerking motion that you get when you're hitting. And if there's any kind of like uncomfortable aspect to your game. And he's saying, I finally went in, got the appendix taken out. I don't have any of that pain anymore. I'm really excited. Like, I want to see the plus 500 slug percentage of Frankie Lindor, where could he hit 30 bombs this year on top of a Gold Glove? And you talk about a sneaky MVP candidate season, especially if the Mets are winning games. I think that's kind of, we talk about the unlocking aspect. I mean, where is the offensive production that Frankie Lindor had when he was in Cleveland, and was the injury what was holding back?
I mean, it's hard to say no, right? I think like Cleveland fans definitely had their moment in the sun after he went to New York, and they're like, we knew you sucked, kind of thing. And it was a little bit more spiteful than anything else. But like you said, I mean, 3 consecutive years with 30 plus home runs, and then he goes to New York following that, the COVID season, and 20 homers, 26 home runs, and Citi Field is not as hitter friendly as Progressive Field is in Cleveland, which is part of it. But when you just look at the raw ISO numbers, I mean, these just fell off dramatically, right? And I remember that COVID season in 2020, a lot of Cleveland fans talking about like, hey, Lindor doesn't look so great, this and that. Well, what we found out is the oblique injury, right? Which even Lindor admitted to himself. He's like, I've had this side pain coming and going for the last couple of years, but I didn't know that I needed an appendectomy, but after the wild card round ended last season, he said he was just in an unbearable amount of pain, ended up undergoing the procedure to alleviate the issue, and he feels totally fine now. This is a really, really interesting case because Francisco Lindor last year, in a season in which he admittedly was not 100% healthy, played through some touch and go oblique issues, he still received a 5th place MVP vote. He still had 2 6th place votes and 22 additional votes down ballot from the guys who vote on this award. And so what we just mentioned a couple minutes ago, it may seem counterintuitive, right? Like, I'm going to tell you, Lindor's 30-1 to win the MVP. Pete Alonso's 15-1, like we mentioned a couple minutes ago. I'm investing in both because it's a correlated outcome with the Mets having a great season, that one of these guys, if not both of these guys, will be at the top or in the conversation for the most valuable player award. To get one of them at 15-1, one of them at 30-1, they both can't win the award, but if one of them wins the award, you're having a nice payday. And if they're both in the conversation, by the time you get to August and September, you're going to have some great hedge opportunities, which could become very, very fruitful for your wallet. With Lindor, it's one of these things where, like, we can pull back up the savant. If you go back to 2019 and you look at these numbers here, 82nd percentile average exit velocity, the barrel control is fantastic. When he made swing decisions, he was hitting the baseball. You can see this almost never whiffed. And then all of a sudden you go to 2020, fall off, 2021, still kind of down from where he was at his peak. And then last year, even more, right? So dealing with that pain, maybe as it just continued to progress last year, this guy received, again, to emphasize, a 5th place MVP vote last year and was nowhere near his peak offensively. So if he's truly healthy this season, Francisco Lindor, you can see the 98th percentile outs above average, like you mentioned, the elite glove. There's absolutely no reason that Lindor should not be right in the thick of this conversation all season long. If the Mets are winning games, I mean, the sky is the limit. I'm excited to see him healthy for what sounds like the first time in a couple of years.
And the media loves him. Like when he was in Cleveland, they couldn't make him the face of baseball because he played in Cleveland.
Yeah.
But if Frankie Lindor goes back to where he was in those Cleveland numbers in New York City, they immediately will try to make him the face of baseball without a doubt in my mind. Like, it will be Shohei Ohtani, and then it will be Frankie Lindor. And, we talked about the defensive aspect. Defensive aspect doesn't win you an MVP award, but if all else equal,
it's a tiebreaker for sure.
Someone's looking at Pete Alonso versus Frankie Lindor, and someone says Pete Alonso is the worst defensive first baseman in baseball, and Frankie Lindor is quite possibly the best defensive shortstop
at a much more important position on the diamond as well.
Right, in a league where, again, the shift has been eliminated, so we're going to see how that looks. I don't know.
Lindor's also stolen as many as 25 bases in a season.
Yeah, he's got some speed on the base paths too, which kind of goes, we can go into our next guy then if we want to talk about, kind of segue into that, where with Starling Marte, there's some sneaky guys on the base paths for the Mets this year. And it's one of the reasons we highlighted Sean Murphy as such an important acquisition for the Braves in our Braves video. The Mets got some sneaky guys on the base paths. Like, we got Brandon Nimmo, Frankie Lindor, if he's healthy, Starling Marte. Most people don't know that Starling Marte, it was a shock to me. He's got 314 career stolen bases. He's third highest right now on the active list. And the two guys ahead of him are like D. Gordon and, I think maybe Billy Hamilton, right, of career stolen bases. Like, he's just, a couple years ago, clearly he was going to steal, he stole like 40 bases.
47.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, holy shit. It's going to be a lot easier to steal bases in this league. Are the Mets sitting on Brandon Nimmo, Starling Marte, and Frankie Lindor on the base paths with guys like Pete Alonso and Escobar? And it's going to be a fun small ball team, especially with a guy like Buck Showalter heading that kind of franchise.
Yeah, so like one major critique with the Mets last year is they just didn't hit enough home runs, right? In a league where it was a lot of times home run or nothing, especially getting into the postseason. Ridiculous stats where, like, the team who hit more home runs won the game like 80% of the time or something like that. The Mets might not have to do that this year to be even better. So they won 101 games last year being home run deficient, And now this year, the rules are bent in their favor. I guess you would say it, like, not that they bent them for the Mets, of course, but these rule changes definitely apply to the Mets in an advantageous way. And we'll bring up Marte's stats here because I don't think a lot of people realize that Starling Marte has been perennially elite on the bases. He's had his down years, and last year he stole only 18 bases. And I think a lot of people were looking at it like, oh, he's 33 years old. Maybe he just doesn't have it in him anymore. Well, Starling Marte complained of lower half leg soreness pretty much all season. He, just to list off some of the injuries that he went through last year that caused him to miss games, he had left oblique tightness, which again, I mean, it's when you're trying to steal bases with razor thin margins of error, any sort of injury that inhibits movement or turning or anything like that can preclude you from stealing bases in certain situations. So left oblique tightness, he had left quadriceps discomfort, groin tightness, a non-displaced fracture in his middle finger that he ended up having to play through in the postseason. So Marte goes in this offseason to have some of these things addressed and looked at by a doctor, finds out that he needs surgery on both sides of his groin to repair a group of tendons that had literally separated from his muscles. And now Starling Marte shows up to camp this year and says, hey, guys, like, I'm good. I feel good. I feel the best that I have felt in over a year. And you're sitting here looking at this 47 stolen bases in 2021. Because what Starling Marte did with the bat last year was sensational, right? I mean, 292 batting average. He 16 home runs, drove in almost 80 runs at the plate. You'll take that from Starling Marte. That he did exactly what you asked him to do if you're the New York Mets. If you can unleash some of this speed again, which last year sprint speed 68th percentile, year before that 83rd percentile. He is aging, so maybe he doesn't get back to the 83rd percentile, but if you can get him back to the 75th or the 78th percentile, somewhere in there, this is a guy that absolutely has 30 plus stolen base potential. And if he can just continue to hit the way that he hit, I mean, you get him on base, and some of the big boys that you have him behind him in the lineup with the Pete Alonsos and the Frankie Lindors and the Mark Cannas and everybody else, Jeff McNeil, like, this is a very, very good lineup. And I don't think people realize that, myself included, watching them last year, because these guys didn't know themselves. Marte didn't know how hurt he was. Lindor didn't know how hurt he was. You're adding two of the best guys in this lineup are now coming back healthy for 2023. I mean, my God, like, this team won 101 games last year. Now has Justin Verlander replacing Jacob deGrom. They went out and got Senga. They bolstered the back end of the rotation with Quintanta. And now they have more depth to absorb any injuries or things like that. And now the offense is just has the potential to be better. And that's before Brett Beatty and Francisco Alvarez come up.
I wanted to hit on the defensive conversation about the Mets before we go more on to the offensive side, because I think it's interesting because it harkens back to a past video. The Braves, when you looked at their defense, have really great gloves at what I would consider luxury positions. So, positions that you don't really, it's not the be all end all. I think the Mets are different. The Mets have all the gloves where you need the gloves. They have Brandon Nimmo, who's an amazing glove out in center field. That's where you need
major strides last year. It's always a knock on him that he couldn't play center field. And last year, again, opportunity to earn a new contract. How much did that play into it? But if he can repeat what he did last year, he was outstanding.
But as well as I do, the most important defensive positions on the field: center field, shortstop, catcher.
Yep.
I think they made a mistake at catcher. I'll get to that in a second. But to have Frankie Lindor and Nimmo at at center field and shortstop, and then have McNeil, who's also another great glove, sitting at second base. The Mets got a good defense behind them. And again, they're weak at Pete Alonso, and they're weak in the corner at Escobar. Who knows if Beatty's going to come up and provide a younger talent at third base, and Escobar is going to be moved more towards not playing third base. He had a home
run the other day, so he's definitely doing his part in spring training to prove that he belongs.
Yeah, so he comes up, and young guy throw him at third base, and that definitely takes away a lot of liability. Mark Hanna doesn't hurt you in left field. So, all positive things. We talked a lot about Sean Murphy in our last video about the benefit of having a great catcher. They need Francisco Alvarez to come up sooner rather than later, because Omar Narvaez is not going to do the job for the Mets in terms of preventing some of the close calls that we're going to have. Like, I think his pop rate he's ranked 62nd of overall catchers in the league when it comes to his pop time. It takes him 2.01 seconds and 23 attempts last season in 84 games. That's concerning for me. If the Mets would have went out and signed Sean Murphy, I would have just oh my Lord. But Omar Narvaez is a concern, I think, on the defensive side for the Mets. And I think that's being underplayed a little bit. And I'm going to keep talking about in these videos how important the catcher position is going to be this year because of the rule changes. And I don't think Narvaez gets the job done for them. And I think that's a concern. What are your thoughts?
I'm less concerned. One, because I don't think it's going to take Alvarez too long to get to the big leagues. Two, because I think Thomas Nido is going to be getting a fair number of starts behind the plate, and you can see he's much better in terms of pop time and in some other metrics. And the other thing to pay attention to as well is these guys might not do a great job controlling the running game, which of course can be problematic and can get out of control, but they are both great framers, which keeps guys off of the bases to begin with, right? And when you have Verlander and you have Scherzer and potentially Senga, who could take, could outperform my expectations, which maybe are a little bit lower than the general public. I think if they can just weather the early part of the season with those guys and not have teams running rampant on them, then less of a concern. Getting Alvarez there, though, I think is a priority. And if you listen to Billy Epler and you listen to the comments that he's made throughout spring training and throughout the winter, it's very, very clear that what they did in the offseason was they went and got pitching. They added to the bullpen. They added to the rotation as much as they could because they know that Alvarez is coming up and they know that they're going to have some help at third base in the very near future. They don't have anybody coming out of the minor leagues that has any sort of upside with the arm on the mound anytime soon. So they're very realistic about that, and I think they've planned accordingly. And Narvaez is a stopgap, right? I know you've.
Well, he needs to be. I mean, he can't be the solution. I mean, if you're telling me that by June we are looking at Alvarez at catcher, Alonso, McNeil, Beatty, Lindor, that's your infield.
And you got Marte, Nimmo, and you have Canna in the outfield.
Well, right. No, and I'm just talking strictly just infield aspect, like with the young guys that are coming in and you're able to get Narvaez out and Escobar out as quick as possible. Then I'm a little bit more high on the Mets, but that's a lot of what ifs, honestly. Like we don't know if that's the picture that we see. And I'm going to go with the idea that it's going to be Narvaez. And if it is Narvaez and a catcher by committee, that might hurt them just because the teams that are in their division, like if they were not in a division with JT Realmuto and Sean Murphy, and great lineups in both the Phillies and the Braves, I don't think it would be a major concern. But I really think the NL East is going to be one of the most competitive divisions in baseball. And three teams realistically could all win that division. And it's going to be the small things that matter. And I think playing some of these old guys at the beginning of the season, it might come to bite them when they get to the later half.
We'll see. I mean,
Clip it.
The other two teams that you mentioned don't have Verlander and Scherzer at the top of that rotation. And
no, but okay, hold on. But then you can say that the other two teams have Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler, and then the other team has Max Fried, right? I mean, and again, some of the younger guys on the Braves, I will not put Spencer Strider and Kyle Wright's name in the same sentence as Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer. But you can say the same thing for the other two divisional teams, right? I mean, the other two teams, Messi didn't make it to the World Series last year. Like, you know what I mean?
But if we're talking purely regular season,
but if
we're just talking purely regular season, I mean, let's continue going down the list here offensively with the Mets, right? You have Brandon Nimmo just signed to an 8-year, $160 million plus deal. You already mentioned the defense. The guy's an on-base machine, one of the most patient hitters in baseball. Only 21 batters last season finished with a lower swing percentage on pitches outside the strike zone. Even more remarkable is that was actually a down year for Nimmo. The guy was elite in terms of play discipline in a year in which he wasn't even at his best. So I think Nimmo, fantastic. Again, it's just a durability thing, which I think you can say about a lot of these guys. You have Mark Canna coming back again for another year with the Mets. He talked about having the finances finally to invest in personal strength and conditioning coaches to try to hit more home runs this year. This is a guy who's only hit 20 home runs once in his career. And now he finally has the luxury of having an entire winter to really invest in himself because he's no longer flirting with potentially being out of baseball and needing that money to actually live the rest of his life. So you add him, you have Nimmo. a healthy Starling Marte and a healthy Francisco Lindor, like there's just so much talent top to bottom, and that's before you even get to designated hitter. And I don't like Daniel Vogelbach at all. At all. I think he's too patient at the plate. I know people laud him for that. He can hit right-handed pitching. He hit well after the Mets acquired him midseason last year, had an 829 OPS after the deadline. Was obviously a no-brainer decision to pick it up for 1.5 mil, but
Can't hit lefties.
can't hit lefties, but you go get Tommy Pham. And
Yeah.
now you have a depth piece with Tommy Pham there. So the Mets just last year, the Mets' weaknesses, they got absolutely nothing from the catcher position. They struggled against left-handed pitching, and that was it. I mean, and they couldn't hit home runs. Those were the three major weaknesses. So if you're telling me that you have Francisco Lindor coming back healthier, could hit more home runs, Mark Canha's working specifically to try to hit more home runs this year. You have Starling Marte coming back healthier, and then that we can add someone who's actually an asset at third base instead of a liability, who's young and continue to get better. And then Francisco Alvarez, you don't even need all of those things to happen. You just need half of them to happen, and you're building upon a team that won 101 games last year. You can pick at the small stuff, and I won't disagree with you. Narvaez is not great behind the plate, but let's not act like they don't have just an ungodly amount of talent everywhere else at the roster bursting at the seams, assuming that they can stay remotely healthy.
We shall see, said the blind man.
You're blind if you don't see the talent on this Mets roster.
No, I see the talent. I can't deny the talent. I'm a believer that they're going to win over 94 and a half games. I just like other guys in the division better. That's just how it comes up to it. And I think it's really about, I'm just concerned about the durability aspect. And I think that's just a fair question to have where, there's a lot of what ifs. And the only guy I truly see as not as a what if is Pete Alonso. Everyone else is still kind of in that what if conversation. So, Lindor says that he's healthy. I hope that he is, because I'm actually a big Lindor fan. I think he's a great person and he's really fun to watch play baseball. So do I hope he's an MVP candidate? Absolutely. Because I hate it when power hitters are the only players talked about in baseball. So a guy who's great at defense, who plays the game right, and then on top of that hits home runs, I would love to see Lindor play well. McNeil, how do you root against a guy like Jeff McNeil? Honestly, every press conference I see him in, great dude, hilarious. The press has a lot of fun with him. We have a buddy who's really into Jeff McNeil, which, side note, maybe we'll bring that up in a show at a later time. Or you have him in just to talk on Jeff McNeil.
In the third round.
It's quite a bromance he has in his mind with Jeff McNeil. If we ever get a chance to speak to him, I will definitely need to bring that up. They all have likable players. I just think that, it's like you said, it's a classic roster construction. I've seen it before being a Yankee fan multiple times. You pay for some really great talent. You have a gap in your farm system, and it could either go really great, where you haven't producing an awesome season, or it can go horrendous. The injuries are just going to stack up.
When have the Yankees had a horrendous season? They've fallen short of
they have
the World
playoff
Series.
But talk about expectations, though. Talk about expectations. If the Mets don't win the division right off the bat, Mets fans are going to be disappointed. If they're just a wild card team again, right?
For sure. You don't pay $300+ million to go to the wild card.
And you have all this smoke in the offseason. You're on Cohen's team. It's an expectation conversation, right? So it's this is not Oakland. This is not Arizona, where the conversation is going to be hey, if we make the playoffs and make a deep run and we're getting everything up and running, awesome. That's not where the Mets fans are. And they shouldn't be, because that's not how this roster is constructed. So I think Atlanta fans can take a deep breath back and go, we won the division a lot. We just won the World Series. I mean, if we have an off year and win 90 games, make the playoffs, and we don't make it all the way, is that disappointing? Sure. But, we have all these guys locked up for the next decade. The Mets just aren't that way. The Mets are looking at this. We need to win now with this kind of talent, because even their minor league system, sure, they got Alvarez and Beatty, but who's next? Right. I mean, they don't have one of the best farm systems in baseball.
No, they don't. There's a huge void there. And this is, again, we talked about it. Cohen is spending at the major league level, and that's what everybody's getting pissed about.
Right.
The guy's also investing ludicrous amounts of money into building one of the best player development systems in baseball. But you're right. I mean, and even if you even if you bring these guys back next year, do you really want a 41-year-old Justin Verlander and a 39-year-old Max Scherzer if those two guys couldn't get it done the year before? Do you want the bullpen to be a whole nother year older? So
Yeah.
I don't feel better, but this is why I feel so good about them this year.
How about them now?
Is they have to get it done. They don't have a choice but to get it done. I know
they really don't.
I know these guys are aging, right? And this is where I was saying we can wrap up here because I know we've been going on for a while, but you said you're going over 94.5 wins. I agree. I'm not stopping there though. I think they win the division. I think they win 100 games. I think they have a shot to have the best regular season record. I think I would bet all of these things. The postseason is a little bit more unpredictable just because of the nature of Major League Baseball. It's not the NBA where you get to run out the same starting five every day. It's not the NFL where you have the same quarterback and the same receivers and the same offensive line for each round of the postseason. You have to use different pitchers in, if it's a 3-game wild card, if it's a 5-game division series, if it's a 7-game pennant series or a World Series. There's a lot of variance and a lot of volatility, and baseball's a game that evens out over large sample sizes and can be extremely frustrating in small sample sizes, which is why there are fan bases that are truly tortured and never get to the big dance. Because the Yankees, I hate the Yankees, Keith. I hate them. Disgusted by them every single year. But when's the last time they had a losing season? It's been decades, right? Even we hate Aaron Boone. Everybody, even people who don't like the Yankees hate Aaron Boone because he's so inept when it comes to making those decisions in the postseason. But over the course of 162 games, a team like the Mets has no excuse to win fewer than 100 games. They are built to win at every single position. The positions where they're starting the year with a little bit of its efficiency, they should have reinforcements on the way at catcher, at third base. The bullpen flexibility, we'll see if that's just some like BS spring training talk if they do go out and acquire some guys or what the true answer is there. But the rotation is elite. There's more depth in the rotation than any other team in baseball. The offense is thin when it comes to the injuries, right? I talked about how much I like the rotation because of the depth that they have to absorb those injuries. That's not the case offensively.
No.
If you lose Lindor, there is no plan B. If you lose Jeff McNeil, you have a massive hole at second base. Third base is really the only spot where like Escobar and Guillerme could hold down the fort. But if you start losing Marte or Mark Canha or Nimmo in center field, like that's where this could unravel. So for me, I'm all in on the Mets this year, truly. But if it goes south, it is the very obvious concerns of these guys are all very old, and there's not when you spend this much money on starters, you don't have a lot of depth because you don't expect to need the depth, right? You expect the guys who make $35 million a year to be there 150 days out of a 162 game season. So I'm all in on the Mets. I will own it if this team falls apart and if they're all on the injured list by the end of the year. But I really think there's too much talent to fail here. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I can't see a disappointing season after what they did in the winter and what Cohen is going to continue to do throughout the year to add talent to this team.
So you have them over 94.5. You have them winning the NL East. You have them winning the pennant, and then you have them winning the World Series.
And winning 100 games and finishing with the best regular season record.
You are okay. All right.
I'm in. I'm all in. This is a team that, and they're not crazy investments, right? It's the same way I would invest in another team, and I've sort of just staggered here because with the Mets, like you can get them. If you think they're winning the NL East and you think they're winning 95 games, they're only a few games away from winning 100, right? And if you think they're going to win 100 games, you get that at plus 170. If they're going to win 100 games, how many teams realistically do you think can win 100 games? For them to have the best regular season record is plus 650. So if they put themselves in that conversation, you can sprinkle some your units. You can put smaller amounts on each of these things to happen. They're all correlated. So I'm not sunk if none of these things happen, but if they all go right, instead of me just cashing a full unit or full couple of units on the over 94.5 wins, I have some fun money stacked here where things could get really fun. And if they do win the World Series,
it'd be huge. It'd be huge for you if you're placing money on all those things. Here's how the season's going to go one of two ways. The way that I think I'm leaning toward is, again, the NL East will be one of the best divisions in baseball. It will be a heater all the way through with the Phillies, Mets, and the Braves. They'll all win close to that. Again, I think I have the Braves at that like 98 win mark. I have the Mets in my mind around like that 96, 95 game. So I think they'll just get over that 94 and a half. If the injuries happen, that team's an 84, 85 win ball club and might miss the playoffs. So it's going to be either a high of all highs, I think, for Mets fans this year, or it's going to be like, wow, like that was I don't even want to think about this season. Because I think if the injuries really come into play, and they very well might, yeah, that team wins like their winning record. I don't think that they're a losing ball club or even a 500 ball club. I just think that there are other teams in the National League that will leapfrog them, and maybe they even miss the playoffs. If you're talking about losing Scherzer for a full month, if you're talking about, God forbid something happens to Verlander, Senga doesn't play out the way that we think he's going to play out coming from Japan. We lose a stunning offensive piece at the beginning, like a Marte, it's one of the older guys. It could get ugly in a heartbeat. And Buck Showalter is a good manager from a personality standpoint if everything's working well, but then he also ushered a lot of Baltimore teams who were constructed very similar to this in the mid-2000 teams. And, I think that's a ballsy pick. I feel much safer with my pick in Atlanta, who's proven it time and time and time again of how they're able to produce. But, I can see how you can talk yourself into your position in the Mets. So
I will say we don't disagree.
Things have to happen.
But we don't disagree on if this goes south, it goes really south, right? I think.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think there's a middle ground for the Mets. And I think this is what you pretty much said as well. Of the Mets don't win 92 games.
No.
The Mets win 100 or the Mets win 80.
You can picture in your mind like a poor Mets season, and you can talk me into this, that the injuries, how they happen, it will be like heartbreaking. It will be 84 games, 85 game win season, just miss the wild card playoff to a team like, God forbid, Chicago Cubs, like somehow they have like a season that kind of puts them at like 86 to 87 wins, or some team that flies in, like the Giants maybe getting into the playoff. Like it will be heartbreaking. It will be like the Brooklyn Nets in basketball. Right, where we have all this hype talking about how great they are and how amazing they are, and it's not apples to apples, but it's about I'm talking about just about expectations, the expectations for a club, and then just everything south happens, and it's just brutal for the fan base. And I really don't want that to happen to Mets. I want to root for something exciting, so I want the 3-horse race of like the team that made the World Series last year, the perennial winner in the Braves, and this team in the Mets that's gone all poker chips in the middle. I want that, but God, I don't want to see like Mets fans just be demoralized and have a season where they miss the playoffs and 84 wins. But it could happen. It could happen with this roster construction.
You know what the crazy thing is, before we get out of here, is it feels like the Mets have talked themselves into being a hated team, or at least Cohen has turned himself into someone that the media continues to come for his throat constantly. The New York Mets got bounced in a 3-game wild card series last year. They didn't make the playoffs before that since 2016, where they lost in 1 game in the wild card. And prior to their World Series run in 2015, had not made the playoffs since 2006, which was their only postseason appearance since 2000 to that point. So this is a fan base that has been tortured, right? It's not like, I think we're all sitting here like, oh my God, the Mets, like we're talking about them like they're the Yankees, right? In terms of expectations, because that's what they've spent their way into, those expectations. But
yep,
this is an organization that has not proven its ability to do these things on a consistent basis yet. Say what you want about the Yankees continually coming up short in October. They've won, I think, 99 games 3 times with Aaron Boone in 5 years. So
yeah, it's frustrating.
The Yankees are going to win 95 games. In a bad year for them, they're going to win 90 games if everything goes south. The Mets, a good year will be 100 wins, like we saw last year. And I really do think they could flirt with 110. Like if everything clicks with this team, 110 wins is not unrealistic. But if things go south, like there's just such a huge possible range of realistic outcomes for this team, and
they don't have a lot of trade pieces. They don't have trade pieces. Like,
not prospect wise, no.
No, but you talk about like Braves or might go out and get a Brian Reynolds. We talk about guys where there'll be Shohei Ohtani talks. Like, if the Mets are struggling middle of the season and they need someone to reinvigorate the lineup, who are you putting in a package to go get the big guy before he becomes a free agent? Right? I mean,
you're gonna have to part with recent draft picks, and a lot of teams just don't want them because they're too far away from the big leagues. And
right, so it's they're in a rough spot. Like, again, it's if we're in a game of Texas,
you know who's on the train, and
yeah, dude, if we're in a game of Texas Hold'em, like the Mets have pushed all in, so I respect that. I really respect that, and it can work really well, or again, it's gonna be really ugly.
Yeah. Well, we will see. Gio, you're on the over 94.5. I can't talk you into the division winner yet, but I'm all in. Just to recap, I'm on the Mets over 94.5 wins. I like them to win the division. I think they win 100 games. I think they have the best regular season record, and I have a very, very small sprinkle on them to win the World Series, just because if they do win 100 games and they cash all the rest of it, I just want to have a little bit of money on the line just to root for them in October. So hopefully things go well. A lot to talk about with the Mets. There are things that we didn't even get to because there is just that much to talk about with the New York Mets. But if you guys have questions, hit us in the comments below. Gio is at NextGenGio on Instagram. Hit him in the DMs there in the comments, posting a lot of great content on a regular basis. We'll be back here for more MLB content as well. So guys, if you do find the content valuable, please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. We will be here all season long. We are available to answer questions in the comments. Hit us up in the DMs, all of that good stuff. But Gio, appreciate you joining us again. I really look forward to turning you into a Mets believer at some point this year. Until we meet again, everyone, thank you for tuning in. We will see you later.